Today we're talking Wendi Adelson and Sara Yousef, and if you stick around, I've got a new jaw-dropping theory as to why Wendy drove to the crime scene. Welcome back to my channel, everybody. How are you? How are you doing? I've been loving the comments on the videos, and I've been talking to you guys, and you guys have been giving me some great insight. I recently put out a post asking about what cases that you wanted me to cover. Yes, to answer some questions, we will be doing Bryan Kohberger and a couple other things. Today, we're going to be talking about Sara Yousef. Okay, so Sara Yousef is an ex-friend of Wendy's. So they go way back. They knew each other for a very long time. And recently, a mentor lawyer through Deep Dive True Crime, they put out a fabulous video with Maya there. I think she works in her office there, but she is reading the deposition that was taken of Sara Yousef. And I do have it. Woo! Anyway, I'm not going to go through it the same way. I'm going to paraphrase a lot of things, but I'm going to go through it, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. Because I do find her so interesting. And one of the biggest reasons is because how often do we get to hear somebody from the inside with this case? We have not, right? We have not heard enough people from the inside. And it's really super, like, I don't understand why Jane McPherson hasn't come forward. Any of her other friends haven't come forward. I just, like, I feel like everyone's quiet. I don't think she's maintained too many friendships, though. The word is that she has gotten shunned by a lot of people in Miami. So that's understandable why she left. But you know, when Sara came forward, it was just so real and honest because she did that of her own accord. She had a strong reaction to Ruth Markel's statement, victim impact statement that she gave in the Katie McBanoa's trial. It tugged at her heartstrings. And we're talking about a friend that has kept some information super quiet and close to her chest for so long. And I think, you know, over time, kind of like Jeff did it super fast, right? Like he like all the puzzle pieces came together pretty quick for Jeff Lacasse. But for a friend like Sara, or even Jane, and maybe she's going through this too, I would imagine going home at night and it would be trouble sleeping at night, right? This is a friend of yours. You believed in her. Probably before his death was constantly complaining, right, about her marriage. Probably constantly talking about, oh, I can't wait to get rid of this guy. I just want to get out of here. I made a huge mistake marrying this guy. And, you know, how many women do that? A lot of women do that, right? A lot of women do that. They just, you know, they blah, 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 blah. We're a bunch of, you know, talking hens. We have coffee, we have lunch, we get together, we have parties and dinner. And you don't really believe your girlfriend when she says, oh, I could just kill the guy. Like, he drives me crazy. Or, you know, I'm going through a divorce and I hate him. And you don't think that a murder is going to happen, right? You don't. So I would imagine that very slowly but surely, as things unfolded for Sara, you know, seeing this from the outside, Wendy was contacting her still and wanted to keep her in the loop. And eventually, you know, after Sara being there for her, you know, spending a lot of time with her after the murder of Dan, just probably gave her the benefit of the doubt at first. But I think, you know, and then she came in, she had some contact with Donna as well. I think, you know, things were starting to, you know, that natural, your stomach drops, something's not right here. And then all of a sudden some arrests are happening and Wendy is still reaching out to you, wanting you to be in her life and all that. And you're like, I don't know if I want to be a part of this anymore because something does not smell right. Right? And so I think she just got rid of Wendy. She sent Wendy an email saying that she needed space. She didn't think it would be good if they talked anymore. And Wendy appeared to be understanding of that. I personally think she was probably crapping in her pants at that point because, she's on to me. And then eventually just tried to make it go away, right? Sara tries to make it go away, but then these trials are happening and she's watching this. And then she sees the victim impact statement from Ruth Markel. And with that came guilt because she had info. She had some info. She didn't know if that information meant anything sinister, but she knew it at least didn't feel right, didn't sound right, and to keep it to herself, I think there was just a lot of guilt. And I think by the time she contacted Georgia Kappelman's office, she first contacted the Markels, wanted to speak with them. We don't know what went on in those conversations, but then eventually went on to finally speak to the prosecution and then give some information, which leads us to now, because Deep Dive True Crime came out with the full deposition that was read by Maya on what Sara said. I'm going to go through it a little quicker because it's been heard. I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, and we're just going to walk through it. What I do want to do is just give you a little background on her. Sara worked as first of all, she went to University of Miami with Wendy. Okay. And she was in her second year and Wendy was in the first year. And they became fast friends. So from that point on, their relationship was even involving Dan and her first husband. So attending each other's weddings, as we know from the deposition, but, being together, doing things together as couples. Sara didn't particularly love Dan. I think she was, in Wendy's corner all the time. And I'm sure Wendy made Dan sound so much worse than he really was, right? Because Wendy wanted out. So our girlfriends are always there in our corner. So they don't really know the real truth. So there's that. She early on, after graduating University of Miami, she worked in a public defender's office for several years. She now lives in San Francisco. One thing I found that was really interesting, though, is that back in 2005, she's the co-founder for Sweat Records. She owned a vinyl record shop. I thought that was interesting. According to her social media pages, what you can find is that she loves music. So she was involved in the music scene in some way. And I just thought that was interesting that her first business endeavor was owning a record shop. Kind of cool. All right. So we're going to start. In the deposition, they're being questioned by the Donna Adelson's defense team. Okay. And yeah, Sara Dugan is also there and is able to question her, but this is from the defense. So they ask about when they meet at the University of Miami and ask the nature of the friendship. She said they were close for 13 years and it was between 2003 and 2017. She went to her wedding. She went to her wedding. So they went to each other's weddings. They also lived in the same apartment complex, saw each other all the time when they were in Miami. When she moved to Tallahassee, they had a couple summers that they would see each other because we all know Wendy got a job at also FSU. So during the summer, she would get together with Sara then. They also met up one time in Montreal, it was mentioned. So yeah, saw each other quite a bit, been at her place in Tallahassee many times. She had stayed the night at Wendy stayed at her house in Miami. She had moved to Tallahassee a couple of times, and she's referring to them living in Tallahassee, going back to Miami. Dan was trying to get a job at the University of Miami. That didn't work out, so they moved back. So She said that she attended Thanksgivings at the Adelson residence on several occasions. So that we've got holidays going on here, like several holidays that this girl has been at with the Adelson family. So Donna, Harvey, also says that she had been to Charlie Adelson's residence on Whale Harbor 2 or 3 times. So it's not just one time, it's 2 or 3 times with Charlie, 2 or 3 times with Donna. She knows this family, right? So they asked why you are no longer friends with Wendy anymore, okay? And why you have now become a witness to this case. So that's important. This is just a deposition, right? So we're not supposed to take the deposition as fact. These are questions that might not even be asked in any of the trials. But the fact that they're saying, why are you a witness in this case, means she has already committed to the prosecution to supply testimony for the prosecution, which tells me that unless Donna's team can get it thrown out, she is on that witness list. For sure. She said, I am not friends with Wendy because I ended the friendship by email in 2017. A lot of people know about that email. She had just said, hey, I can't do this anymore with you. I need, for my own personal health, to not get involved anymore because it's causing chaos in your life and it's chaos in my life. Okay, so she said, I am not friends with Wendy anymore because I ended that through email in 2017 for several reasons. The primary reason is that her situation was bringing a lot of chaos into her life and mine. Because I was close friends with her, the stress of this situation was becoming something that I had to absorb. Part of that was not her fault, but just a lot of media attention and instability. And I was at a difficult point in my life going through a separation, and I found that it was too much for me to take that on as well. Okay. She also went on to say, I also disapproved of how I believed she, Wendy, was protecting her family. She knew that they were involved in the case. So 2017, that is so long ago. This woman has been holding on to this information. I could just see it now. You believe in your friend, you believe in your friend, you believe in your friend. A murder happens, you believe in your friend, but you're worried. And then, you're like, okay, let's see how this plays out. And little by little things are happening. And like, you just want to puke. You're starting to feel like, do I know this person? I don't know. So yeah, since 2017, Wendy is portraying her family as innocent, and Sara is saying, she is protecting this family a little too much, and it was making her very uncomfortable in her shoes, her stilettos, whatever. So she said that she knew they were involved in the case. I take that as she knew that her family was involved in the crime of murdering Dan Markel. That's what I'm getting from that. She writes, I'm reading what she says, I didn't approve of some of the choices she was making, and I felt like she was misleading a lot of the men in her life that she was dating, making each feel like he was the only one when they were not. How interesting is that? Because that is how Jeff felt. And Jeff was just probably one of many, right? Because we know that Jeff thought she was cheating, had good reason to believe so, even walked by a coffee shop one day, and there she was with some other guy having coffee. Now, is that a crime? No, it's not a crime. But it's interesting because he had other things that he knew about. She was on dating websites, still communicating with men while she was still dating Jeff Lacasse. Okay. Then this guy shows up at the coffee shop. And by the way, I think that was like totally planned. I do. I think that she arranged for him to see her with this other guy at the coffee shop. Why? Because she needed Jeff Lacasse to get pissed, right? If Jeff Lacasse is pissed, Jeff Lacasse is the jealous ex. And then when it comes time for that murder, which is right around the corner, He's leaving around the same time. He's leaving around the same time of the murder to go take a trip. It's all going to fall into play, right? And it's funny that Sara Yousef is talking about how Wendy is playing multiple guys here. She's a player. She's a player. And I think she says one thing to one guy and another to the other, and she's got it all under control. She's like, a spider weaving its web. And she's still doing it in 2017. Still doing it. So she goes on to say that those are her primary reasons for not talking to Wendy anymore. And it was very hard for her. And she had to send her an email and tell her she needed the space. And she said, once I had the space, I realized I didn't want to be friends with her anymore. Right? I mean, sometimes when you step out of the circle and you look at the situation you were once in from the outside, you can see the toxic crap, right, that you were living in. And I think she was like, I don't like this person, right? I don't like this person. So, so the attorney asks, about misleading guys. Am I characterizing it correctly that you were observing a friend in the dating world who was playing both sides of the fence, not being honest, and since you're in the same circle, it circled back to you? And she said, right. I didn't want to have to cover for her. Okay, so, we're not perfect, right? Back in the day when I was dating, I'd be dating somebody and sometimes maybe I didn't want them to know where I was going, or, you ask your friend, hey, cover for me. I think Wendy was, full disclosure to Sara about all these different guys and was asking Sara for some help, at times, hey, maybe they were going out and ran into a guy she was dating. Say, hey, make sure he knows that I was with you the other night, because really she was probably with somebody else. And I think her lies and her deception and her cheating was just, getting a little crazy for Sara, right? She didn't want to deal with that anymore. The attorney says you mentioned disapproving of her acceptance of family that she knew was involved in the case. Can you explain that? She says, I can get into specific examples of what she said if that's helpful. And I don't know if you want to go in chronological order or focus on one topic. So the attorney requested chronological as being what he wanted, or she. I don't know if it was a female or a male. She says, okay, so I guess we already covered how we met and how our friendship developed. Feel free to ask if you have questions about the marriage or the time immediately after the murder, if we want to stay chronological. So the attorney says, yes, whatever enables you to tell the story you need to tell in this environment. You've been in my shoes before, so I'm interested in what you have to say, not what I have to ask. So Sara says, after Dan was murdered, and I was aware that it was a highly contentious divorce, Wendy emailed me some of the motions that Danny had filed. So, her being an attorney, I'm sure she bounced off of Sara more than any other friend, and I don't know if any of her other friends that we know of are attorneys, but yeah, I mean, Sara might just be the most ultimate witness here, because think about it. Her being an attorney, she probably talked to her and asked for advice about how to fight Dan more than any of her girlfriends. So yeah, she's important. She talked a lot about how difficult Dan was to be married to, and even worse, to be divorced from. She said, I remember Wendy calling me the day Dan was murdered and telling me Dan had been shot, and they didn't think he was going to make it. She said, quote, I just had the worst moment of my life telling the boys they don't have a father anymore. So the attorney said she had the worst day of her life. And she said, I was extremely shocked, shaken, and terrified. I felt deeply disturbed by what had happened. So she came to Miami a couple of days after the murder and asked my ex-husband and me to come to her parents' condo. We went to the condo building on South Beach. We were just there to talk to her, hug her, and sit with her while she grieved and processed everything. And then the attorney asked, who's we? And she said, his name is Keir. She used to be married to him. Do you have contact info for him? She said she didn't have it because they had not communicated since 2016. But he lived in Plantation, Florida for a while, but I don't have any updated information. So you go to the condo, and then what happens there? Well, she was crying. She was devastated and shaking. Her mind was going in all directions, which I think is understandable. Yeah, let's stop right there. She just finds out about this. Most friends aren't even thinking anything sinister, right? One of your greatest friends' husband has been murdered. I would think that when she showed up at that condo, whether you normally would never even go there in your mind, or maybe you did for a second, you'd be like, what am I doing? My friend just lost her husband. You're gonna stay out of that cave, right? You're not gonna go in there. So that makes a lot of sense. But until Wendy starts repeating, it wasn't just one time, saying, I'm going to prison for the rest of my life. Not just once, throughout her conversation that day. I'm going to go to prison. I'm going to go to prison for the rest of my life. I'm going to go to prison for the rest of my life. Now, there's an A and B here that I want to say. And Sara, understandably so, believed that Wendy was only saying that because, yeah, the spouse is usually looked at first, right? That makes total sense. So I would be like, oh, no, you're not. No, of course not. You're not going to go to jail for the rest of your life. You're not, right? But we know a lot of things about Wendy today that when we look at that statement, we're like, oh, wow. Like, could that be her really flipping out, like really believing that she is going to go to jail for the rest of her life because she did this, because she's part of this whole thing about arranging the hit on her husband, ex-husband. So the attorney goes, Wendy said that? Yes, she did, Sara says. And then the attorney goes, and at that time you were a public defender. And she said, yes. And I might have been a senior or a trainer. I was handling a wrongful conviction case with my mentor. So that's where my mind was focused. I assumed she was talking about being wrongly convicted herself. So again, Sara's expertise as an attorney for a public defender, being a public defender is, naturally, if I had a friend that was a public defender and I could be in some trouble, not only would I go to them, but I could see my friend thinking that makes total sense why she would come to me and say all these things to me. So, okay, so there's that. So when the attorney said, so when she said, I'm going to prison for the rest of my life, you thought she meant she was afraid of being falsely accused. And Sara said, yes. And I thought she feared being the natural suspect as the ex-wife. And being her history with Dan would make people wrongly piece things together. Okay. The attorney goes, you're describing this with the benefit of hindsight, but at the time, your assumption was that she was worried about being wrongfully convicted because of her contentious history with Dan. And Sara said, exactly. What else happened during that conversation? The attorney said. Sara said, my ex-husband, who happens to be black, said something like, Wendy, do you even know how white you are? It's not going to happen. That was his way of trying to reassure her, a kind of joking point he would make sometimes. So he's said things like that before about her being white. So what are other things she's tried to get away with in conversation in front of Sara and Keir? You know what I mean? This upper crust, like privileged woman that Wendy is, she strikes me as a type that's always testing the waters. That's always saying, hey, what do you think if I did this? What do you think if I did that? And then giggle, because she's obnoxious, right? The fact that he says, it's a point about her. He's made a point about her demographics before is interesting. And could she had start making little jokes like that in front of them prior to the murder because she was testing the waters to see how they were going to react when the murder happened? Because remember, Wendy knew. She knew this was going to happen. And the way she speaks to her friend, who's a public defender, even prior to the murder, is very important because it makes her look less guilty if she had been asking questions about things before the murder happens. Did that make sense? I hope that made sense. So did that meeting come to an end after that, or was there more? And she said, I don't remember any other specific memories from that meeting. And then the attorney said, okay, what happened next? And she said, soon after that, Wendy's oldest son had a birthday party. And my ex-husband, Keir, and I were invited along with many of her friends. And it was taking place at her parents' condo. Everyone brought presents, Lego kits, things to try, and make it a good day for him. Do you recall what year this was? And she said it was right after the murder, mid to late summer 2014. And you said this is the only interaction you recall involving Donna Adelson. She said, yes. I walked into the kitchen area of the condo. It was a very open plan style condo. So, island, probably connected to a family room and everything. So really everybody was in one huge room. But she walked into the kitchen area where Donna was standing. She was there, and it seemed like she had just read or seen something. Maybe it was on her phone or a newspaper. And she basically goes on to say, they're talking about him like he was a beloved professor. But, he was a jerk. Yeah. Sara says she looked up and said it directly to me, eye contact and all. Was she in a conversation with anyone else when you walked in? She said, no, it didn't seem like a conversation. I think she was reacting to something she had just read. Did you know Danny Markel, the attorney said? And Sara said, yes, through Wendy. I remember when she first went on a date with him, and she talked to me about it. I knew him during their marriage and when he visited her. So attorney says, so Donna would feel comfortable saying something like that to you. And she said, yes, because I had been involved in their lives for a long time. Why did that remark strike you as strange? The attorney said. And Sara said, because he had just died. In most cultures, we don't speak ill of the dead, especially so soon. It conveyed to me an inappropriate anger, considering he wouldn't be bothering anyone again. Yeah. So the cold callousness of Donna Adelson. It just supports, it's just a little tidbit. Nothing that is going to slam dunk anything with her case, but it really, with those emails with Wendy, the way she was talking about him, the Wendy and her calling him gibbers, calling him stupid, just all sorts of names. And then he gets killed, and a friend of Wendy's that knew Dan walks in, and you talk about him like that. The father of your grandchildren. Pretty crazy. So it was the timing that seemed off, is what the attorney asked next. And she said, yes. How did you respond? She said, I don't recall my response. I knew Danny was difficult and confrontational. I also knew Donna was protective of her daughters, so I don't think I said much. You didn't particularly care for Danny either, did you? She said, it was mixed. I did not care for him a lot of the time. He was confrontational, talked a lot about himself. Didn't show much interest in others, but he also did kind things like sending me interesting articles through Wendy. He had a good heart and was a great dad. I just wouldn't have chosen him as a personal friend. Okay. I've known people like that. Maybe, you just don't click. Especially the more intelligent community, I could see that. Clashing with other people, other scholarly people. Yeah, because she is well educated. She is also an attorney. So, yeah. And hey, maybe Dan knew a lot more than a lot of these people anyway. I mean, he was a shining star, right? And maybe it just pissed off people. Maybe. Okay, so now getting into the nitty gritty here, the Donna Adelson attorney is looking to figure out exactly what this woman is going to say on the stand if the prosecution puts her up there. So he says, I need to reconcile your testimony with how the prosecution might use it. Donna saying something like that could seem meaningful, but considering she disliked him and had been through a terrible divorce involving her daughter, I'm not sure how significant it really is. So he's putting doubt on it, what she's saying, and it's clearly the beginning of trying to get it thrown out. Sara said, I understand. That part is not up to me. I'm just telling you what happened. Then the attorney said, aside from that comment, is there anything else Donna Adelson said or did that day? No, and that's the only thing I can testify to regarding Donna, Sara said. Okay, so Sara goes on to say, over the next year after the homicide, Wendy did not talk much about it. Myself and others in our social circle were very curious, not obsessed, but interested. I'd probably be obsessed. I'd be asking all the time, hey, what's going on, right? But on a few occasions, I asked her what's going on with the investigation, and she told me the police suspected one of Dan's former students, someone from a New York case he had worked on, and then lastly, his new girlfriend's ex-husband. So the new girlfriend is Amy Adler. She was a law professor at NYU. She's the sister of renowned designer Jonathan Adler, which, brought her, hold on, I got a little information on that here. Yeah, I mean, it put her name in the spotlight a little bit. But interestingly enough, we can add stalker to the list of qualities of Wendy, because Wendy was stalking Amy Adler. I don't know if anybody knows that. She was searching her on the internet. They found these searches. And by the way, I don't know if you guys know this, but they found porn on Wendy's laptop. So she was, use your imagination. So the Google searches of Wendi Adelson included Amy Adler, Jonathan Adler, and even was searching for the ex-husband's name on her Google searches. So that's interesting, right? Because she's telling her inner circle of friends, like Sara Yousef, that that the ex-husband of Amy Adler is somebody that they're looking into. Now, the police was not talking to Wendy at this time. So when she answered the question about what's going on in the investigation, she really didn't know. She didn't know. She was not involved anymore. They were not keeping her in the loop. So she made all that up. So the fact that she brings up the ex-husband of Amy Adler, and then we know that Google searches prove she was searching the ex-husband's name. Why are you searching the ex-husband's name? Why? Why do you need to know? Why do you need to know? You needed to know because you were looking for different avenues on how you're going to divert this investigation away from you, right? So there's that. We also know that she had been vocal about being very jealous of the new girlfriend, commented on how pretty she is, talked to Jeff Lacasse about Amy Adler, and he can vouch for that as well. So really, really, really interesting about the girlfriend. So she implied that the information came from the police and that she was in touch with them. The attorney says, did she ever forward you anything? And she said, yes, she forwarded me a news article from the Tallahassee Democrat that said there weren't any new leads. So she forwarded her, she forwarded her an article basically proving that she just lied to Sara Yousef, right? She just lied to her. And later you found out what, the attorney said. And then Sara said that she had invoked her right to counsel after giving her initial statement and then never spoke to police again. So she's a liar. We all knew that anyway. At the time, the attorney says, she gave you the impression she was still in communication with the law enforcement. She said yes. And then she quotes, the police think, quote, end quote, instead of my lawyer told me. So interesting phrasing there, right? So she said, Sara said that she said, the police think yada, yada, yada. Instead of saying my lawyer told me yada, yada, yada. So I felt like she wanted me to believe that she was talking directly to the police. And it's interesting, because most people would have, been talking through their lawyer at this point. Not the police ain't talking to Wendy. They're not going to talk to her. She's a suspect from day one. If you watch my last video, I put the compilation of all the media footage together, and it's clear. It's just so plain as day that they were looking at her. And the first 20 minutes of that interrogation, she's outing her whole family. So, do you know when you realized that Wendy had invoked her right to counsel and stopped talking to the police? And Sara said, I think it would have had to be when the trial started happening, so probably not till 2019. And then the attorney said, and that wasn't a factor in your friendship ending in 2017. And she said, no, because I don't think I realized at that time that she had invoked. But I did believe she was engaging in behaviors to protect her family, her brother, her mother, and that's when I believe they were involved. So in 2017, she believed they were involved. That's a lot of crap to hold, to keep, inside you like that. I feel for this girl. I can't imagine. I can't imagine the nights of just tears and what do I do? What do I do? I don't know. My best friend, she's my co-host on our podcast on Mondays and Friday nights, and I can't imagine, walking around thinking my best friend killed somebody. Just can't. So it was the affidavit implicating Charlie and Donna Adelson that changed your perspective, the attorney said. And she said, that's right. Was your belief supported by anything else, something you personally observed? And she said, yes. The affidavit had information about how the payment to the hitman was made, speaking in code, behavior after the, quote, bump, and so on. And that combined with my personal knowledge of Charlie's money, the family's hatred of Dan, and how protective they were of Wendy, and especially Wendy's lack of curiosity about who killed Dan. This led me to this conclusion. I knew the attorney was going to ask this next. It's just naturally the next question, right? That's the only thing he's thinking of because he does not want this to come out. Let's go back to that lack of curiosity. You mentioned she would say the police suspected a former student, someone from a New York case, or a new girlfriend's ex-husband. What else? And Sara says, about a year after the murder, I asked again. And she told me, Sara, most murders are solved within the first 48 hours. The attorney says, and what did that mean to you? And Sara said, it felt like she was saying she had given up hope and didn't want me asking anymore. So she didn't want Sara asking questions anymore. And then the attorney said, and your professional background at the time? Well, I was a senior supervising attorney at the public defender's office. I handled only homicide cases. Yes, most murders are solved within 48 hours, she said. But not all. And I have had plenty of cold cases, some over 10 years, and this didn't feel like most murders. So it felt like she was trying to shut down the topic. And Sara said, yes, that was the purpose of the statement, in my view. And he said, advance us forward. Was there anything else strange about her behavior? Then Sara says, about a year after the homicide, her tone changed. She went from expressing fear, saying she felt like a refugee, afraid for her life and her boys, and using crass language. She said things like, Danny got whacked. Yeah, that's Wendy. Crazy Wendy. Because she really does think she's invincible. She really does. And I think she pushes the limit, you know? She even did on the stand. She would make just weird joking comments. So regarding the hitman joke when she was on the stand, she said it was a bad joke. It was stupid. I do that a lot. She would also smile a lot when she said no. Do you remember that? She would just be like, no. Except that my late ex-spouse sounds like latex spouse. People think I'm happy because I smile constantly, but I wear a mask. What about first we got divorced, then he got murdered? And then how about this one when she said, the state is not going to arrest me? She's just really nauseating. I can't. All right, anyway, so immediately after the murder, for about a year, she was actively afraid for herself and her children, and she said, yes, absolutely. The attorney then goes, so then around 2015 of July, that fear changes to a more casual, crude tone. And she says, yes, I can't give an exact date, but the tone changes. The dust had settled, and she began referring to it in ways I thought were inappropriate, which is kind of like her loving to tell people, my brother, he bought me this TV as a divorce present because it was cheaper than to get a hitman. Just so Wendy, right? She's coming alive in this deposition. She really is. So then, did she say Danny got whacked more than once? And Sara said, I think so, but I definitely remember her saying it at least once. Any other examples? No, not that I remember. Interesting to say whacked, right? Whacked is this is back in 2015. She's not supposed to know about a hit. She doesn't know. Remember, she's not supposed to know how her husband died. So for her to say whack, this isn't Tony Soprano coming along and showing up and, whacking your ex-husband. I mean, really, Wendy? I can't believe that this woman would use that word. Or any woman would use that word about their ex-husband and father of their kids. It says a lot. So it shifted from fear and protectiveness to something crude and crass. And she said, yes, that's how I would describe it. The attorney said summer 2015 to 2017 was a remaining period of your friendship. Were they key events in between? Sara Yousef says, yes. When the first 2 arrests were made, she called me at work. She said, Sara, I'm shaking. I asked why, and she said, arrests have been made in Danny's murder. And I told her, well, that's wonderful. You should feel safe now. And then she said, what if my crazy brother Charlie hired a hitman? Okay. That was before the probable cause affidavit implicating Charlie, the attorney said. And Sara said, yes, the arrest came first. The affidavit naming Charlie and Donna came shortly after she said that. So, arrests are made. She's shaking in her shoes in her passive-aggressive, condescending way, calls Sara and says, I'm so scared. I'm so worried. What if my crazy brother Charlie hired a hitman? And then right after that, he gets arrested. And Donna. Then the attorney said, what if my brother Charlie hired a hitman? And you said what? And she said, that's your problem. Meaning Charlie's not Wendy's. So she was like, well, it has nothing to do with you. I mean, it does suck that it's your brother and your mother, right? But what she's trying to say is she's trying to calm her down and be like, well, what are you worried about? I mean, it doesn't involve you. Yeah, I mean, I would still be worried if it was my brother or my mom and I was still innocent. I'd be like, well, yeah. Sara goes on to say, well, I didn't believe Wendy could have been involved at that point. So then what happened? The attorney said. And she said, well, someone was asking her to give a statement, and I encouraged her to go ahead and do it. I told her that her first statement had helped clear the air and made it clear that she had nothing to hide, and I thought she should do that again. And the attorney said, but you're a criminal defense attorney. That's not any advice you would normally give. And she said, never. I've never advised a client to give a statement, but I thought she was being sincere and that she'd be believed and that it would help clear her name publicly. So the attorney said, so you gave her friendship advice, not legal advice. And she said, exactly. I believed she was telling the truth, and I figured that suspicion was clouding around her brother because of what she said. So the attorney says, but to clarify, when she brought up Charlie, it wasn't based on known public information. And she said, correct. I didn't have any reason to suspect Charlie until she said that. The attorney then said, and when she said someone was asking her to make a statement, did you know who? And she said, no. I don't know if it was law enforcement, the media, or a deposition. And then the attorney said, and your impression was that she wanted you to tell her not to do it? And Sara Yousef said, yes, I think she expected that from me as a defense attorney. You know, she's totally using her friend here to navigate the waters, to try to find out how she could get out of it. How could she get out of this? I'm going to use my friend who does believe I'm innocent. And since she knows the law and she has inside thinking, I'm going to test it all out on her. You know, and I'm shaking. Arrests have been made in Danny's murder. Yeah, you knew those arrests were going to be made. You're checking to see, because how Sara reacts might be what any other normal person reacts, like a Georgia Cappleman maybe. Right. Sara said, not much in the short term happened after that. The call ended, and I told her not to be afraid and that things would be okay. And later, after Charlie and Donna were named in the affidavit, Wendy then emailed me to make a statement on the family's behalf to say that they were innocent. She asked Sara to make a statement, not only helping Wendy, but asking. Man, that's a big deal. Think about that. Again, remember, Wendy's not supposed to know anything. Wendy is asking for help from Sara, her attorney friend, not only for her, but to help Charlie and Donna, because they're all in on it together, right? So what did you do? The attorney said. Well, I declined. I told her I wouldn't do that, is what Sara said. Do you have that email? She said, yes, and I'll send it to the state and they can forward it to you. So that email is going to be part of the trial for Donna. It's going to say, hey, can you please make a statement on behalf of Charlie and Donna? No smoking gun there, but, you know, it's not good. Okay, was Wendy asking you to make a statement after Donna's arrest or Charlie's? And she said, no. Donna's arrest only happened recently, and I haven't been in touch with them since. It was after Charlie and Donna had been named in the probable cause affidavit. And then the attorney said, what did you say? And she said, I said I knew too much about the marriage. I didn't want to become part of discovery. I told her it wouldn't be helpful for me to talk about the acrimonious divorce and that it was better for her if I stayed out of it. So I didn't give the statement. The attorney said, were there any other events between that and the end of the friendship? She said, yes. I was living far from work and sometimes stayed with friends nearby. Wendy generously let me stay at her place on South Beach for one night. While we were getting ready for bed, she said offhandedly, poor Charlie's having panic attacks. That particular statement, Sara said, stopped me in my tracks. It felt like she was trying to get others to believe that he wasn't involved. So I asked her, Wendy, is believing in Charlie's innocence a prerequisite for our friendship? She said no. Then the attorney said, and what was the significance of that to you? And Sara said, well, it felt like she believed he was involved. The fact that she was okay with me believing Charlie was involved and still being friends suggested to me that she accepted it. And if my brother were innocent of murder, I wouldn't want a friend who thought he was guilty. So the attorney says, so you believe she was well aware of Charlie's involvement? And Sara says, yes. When she said, quote, what if my crazy brother Charlie hired a hitman? I believe that meant she already knew about it. And the attorney said, You take that as her admitting knowledge or suspicion? Keep in mind the attorney probably had to change his underwear a while ago. Because if I was that defense attorney right now, knowing what Sara just said, I'd be like, freaking out. Sara said, yes. She has since claimed it's impossible that Charlie was involved, which contradicts what she had previously said. I see those as conflicting statements. Yeah. So remember, she was the first person in the first 20 minutes of her interrogation to say, I'm worried about my brother being the one to do it, right? Now she's contradicting herself, saying it's impossible that Charlie was involved, which speaks to Wendy's guilt and her knowledge. Okay? So you believe her claim that it's impossible is not credible. And Sara says, correct. It directly contradicts what she told me before. And the attorney, who's crapping his pants, and did that contradiction factor into your decision to end the friendship? And Sara says, yes, it felt like she was protecting her family, trying to get others to believe that they were not involved when she knew or strongly suspected otherwise. So now the attorney, probably with beads of sweat dripping off his face, says, did she ever say anything else about her family's involvement? Sara says, no. Whew. Not only that question about Charlie hiring a hitman, but that was enough for me to believe she knew or suspected. So the attorney says, you also took exception to her asking you to make a statement defending her family? Yes, she said, and to her portraying Charlie as a victim. Quote, poor Charlie is having panic attacks. Attorney says, can I conclude, based on your statements, that you believe Donna and the Adelson family are guilty of something? Sara Yousef says, yes. Just matter of fact, yes. The attorney said, what are they guilty of? She said, conspiring to murder Dan Markel. The attorney says, what are they guilty of? And Sara says, conspiring to murder Dan Markel. Just Donna and Charlie? He's really pushing it now, right? No. Sara says, no. Donna, Charlie, and Wendy, in my opinion. The attorney said, so you believe, I wish I was a fly in the wall on this one. The attorney says, you believe all three conspired to murder Dan Markel? Sara says, yes, and that they solicited someone to kill him. And the attorney goes, so your opinion is based on what? Probable cause affidavits? Sara says, yes, and sworn testimony, police reports, and my own personal observations. Okay? Which, out of all that, I mean, how credible is that? I mean, Sara's own observations are going to be weighed heavily. And if she does well on the stand and speaks from her heart, yeah, she's going to be one of the best witnesses in Donna's trial. So the attorney says, so not rumors or media speculation. And she said, no, I'm basing it on official sources, not gossip. The attorney goes, you'd agree you don't have all the information. You didn't watch every part of the trials. She says, I believe I watched all of the trials. There have been 3. The attorney asked if she had watched pretrial motions. Sara says, correct. And those weren't streamed, but I watched all trial testimony, openings, and closings, and this affected me personally and professionally. I took it seriously. The attorney goes, so your opinion is like that of a juror based on evidence and testimony? Sara says, yes. And also based on your relationship with Wendy and what she said and did? Sara said, yes. And then the attorney said, beyond that, any other personal investigation or new evidence? She said, no, I've told you everything I know. And then the attorney said, you sent Wendy an email ending the friendship? Yes, but I didn't say I don't want to be friends. I said I needed space for my mental health. She sent a kind response. Take the space you need, my friend. Over the next year, she sent 1 or 2 messages saying she missed me, and I didn't respond. The attorney said, can you forward the email to me? She said, I believe I still have it, and I'll send it to the state. And then the attorney said, how did you become a witness in this case? And Sara said, after the last trial, I watched Phil Markel's victim impact statement. It moved me deeply, especially hearing about the grandparent alienation and how they have no meaningful contact with the children. I realized how much time had passed and how old the Markels had become. I had been following the grandparent legislation. I wondered whether my information could help them gain visitation. At this point, have something good come out of it, right? If it was just for that alone, her coming forward, she's like my hero. Who did you speak to? I spoke to two mentors, a Harvard lawyer and one Yale lawyer, and asked if my statement might help. And they said yes. And I knew I might become part of a criminal trial, which was not my goal, but I wanted to help the Markels. The attorney said, who did you contact? And she said, I emailed Orrin Snyder, the Markels attorney. Do you have that email? She said, I'm sure I do. And please forward it, yada, yada. What happened after that, the attorney said? She said, he contacted me back. We arranged a phone call. I told him what I knew. A few months later, he said he was giving my name to Georgia Kappelman. Did anyone from her office reach out? Yes. And it took a few months, but Jason Newland, the investigator, contacted me. We should schedule a call. I'm flabbergasted that they waited. Or not waited, but somehow overlooked this. Because if I had seen her name in my inbox and I worked for the state, I'd be on that phone pronto. So it happened in May, April or May. And well after Donna's arrest, Georgia Kappelman was also on the call. And then they asked to confirm the date. So that is where we're at. Yes, it's been read before. I'm reading it and commenting on it in a different way. I wonder what you all think. Please comment below. I want to hear what you think about Sara Yousef. I think she's going to be a very important witness, and pray they don't find anything. Pray that they don't find a way to get Judge Everett to throw it out. One last thing, and I think it's pretty cool. So we have talked a lot about on my channel about Wendi Adelson driving to the crime scene. And the general consensus has been that she drove there just because she was impatient and she wanted to make sure it was done. And maybe even she was going to notify somebody over in Miami that it had been done as well, since she was the only one in Tallahassee that would be able to communicate with anybody over there and let them know. And then I had a viewer last week that commented that they thought that Wendy went to the crime scene because she wanted to be the, damsel in distress, the ex-wife that finds her ex-husband shot and gets to make the phone call and poor me and my poor children and, oh, I found him and all that. I thought that was really interesting too. But then I had a viewer just yesterday. Her name is Sally Cortland. She shared a theory on my video where she said that, and maybe I should just read it to you guys. Okay, let me read it to you. Okay, and tell me what you think. Okay, about this comment. I have a theory about Wendy's visit to the crime scene. Let's remember that at this time, Wendy had carefully set up Jeff Lacasse to take the fall for the murder. She was not aware that Jeff had changed his plans and left town early, after she cold-shouldered him 2 days before this. During the expected police interview, she has a visit from a friend named Jane who appeared to be carefully coached to bring up the name Jeff Lacasse as a possible murderer. Jane was also unaware that Jeff had a complete alibi and was in a different state at the time of the murder. Now, if the murder had been done by professionals inside the house and with a silencer, then the neighbors would have been unaware. Dan would not have been found for at least a day, and Wendy would have had time to go into the house and plant evidence to implicate Jeff Lacasse. I think Wendy was on Trescott for a far darker purpose than just confirming that the murder had been completed. I mean, really? I mean, think about that. Maybe. I mean, it's a theory where some people might be like, okay, now you're really pushing it. But think about it. It is possible, right? I mean, to go there, she dated him. Who knows what she has that belongs to him? There's DNA in her house of Jeff Lacasse. I mean, maybe she was driving down the street and was going to go in there and plant some evidence. And then make the phone call and be like, I just found him, and that would give her the excuse to go on by there. Her kids are also an excuse to go on by there. Oh, I thought they were home that day. I was going by to check on them, maybe, So I'm loving the comments and I'm loving these ideas you guys are all coming up with. So keep them coming. I really do appreciate it. But I do find it really, that would be really crazy. That really would. And then, of course, she gets all the way down the street, which is a mile long, that she lied about going on the street. Remember, she said she couldn't turn on the street, but she actually did turn on the street and she went an entire mile. Check out my Wendy drive-through crime scene video. It is on my page. It is very, very clear and concise, and it walks you right through it as if she was driving it herself. So make sure you go ahead and watch that video. So I just keep the comments coming. I want to hear your ideas and all the things that I haven't thought of and that some of our other viewers would be interested in hearing about. And thank you, Sally, for the comment. I so appreciate it. And that is it for today. Make sure that you subscribe, like, and share my channel. I would so appreciate your support, and I will see you next time.